The chill in the air wasn't the only thing that made the mountain roads feel cold. Ethan had lived through things most men could never imagine, yet this new chapter in his life had brought him to a place where even his courage faltered. A single, fragile creature lay in the snow, wounded, abandoned, yet alive. It would change everything, but would saving it be his redemption? Or would it drag him further into a past he thought was behind him? Follow the story and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. What do you think lies ahead for Ethan and the unexpected companion he's found? The night was the kind that bit through every layer of cloth, where even the silence seemed frozen. Snow drifted lazily across the empty Montana highway, and Ethan Ward's old Ford truck hummed like a ghost through the cold. Inside, the heater barely worked, and the cab smelled faintly of oil and pine. Ethan, a 37-year-old veteran with shoulders broad from years in uniform and eyes that had seen too much desert sun, drove as though he had nowhere left to go. His breath fogged the window as he exhaled slowly, watching the road unwind like an unending scar through the wilderness. It had been 3 years since he'd left the service, yet the war never really left him. The flash of explosions, the heat of metal, and the sound of Shadow's final bark still haunted the edges of his sleep. He used to say that dog had more courage than most men he knew, and maybe more soul too. That was before the blast took everything but his memory. Now driving down a lonely road near Bitter Creek, Ethan told himself he was just passing through, though a part of him knew he was circling something he couldn't name, perhaps forgiveness. The storm had been building for hours, its wind scraping the windshield in long, icy breaths. He adjusted the wipers and leaned forward, scanning the stretch of road ahead. That was when he saw it. Something small, still lying half in the slush at the edge of the ditch. He frowned. Maybe debris from a fallen branch. Maybe an animal. Maybe nothing. But something inside him, an instinct that once kept him alive overseas, told him to slow down. The truck's tires crunched against the frozen gravel as he pulled to the shoulder, the world outside immediately swallowing the sound of the engine. He stepped out, boots sinking into the wet snow, and the wind knifed through his jacket, carrying the metallic scent of frost and pine. For a moment he heard nothing but the distant hum of wind turbines on the ridge. Then, there it was. A sound so faint he almost missed it, a whimper. Ethan's heart tightened. He followed it to the ditch, crouching low. The shape came into focus under his flashlight. A German shepherd puppy, no more than 3 months old, lying twisted in the mud. Its fur was caked with grime patches of tan and black, hidden beneath dirt and blood. One hind leg bent awkwardly. The other trembled each time the pup tried to move. Its breaths came shallow, sharp, desperate. "Easy," Ethan murmured, his voice barely audible. He reached out a gloved hand, but the pup flinched weakly, dragging itself an inch away before collapsing. Ethan swallowed hard. He'd seen this before, men and dogs fighting for life after shrapnel tore through flesh. The battlefield had just changed its shape. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling beside it. "You're okay. I got you." He removed his gloves, letting his bare hands meet the freezing air, and brushed the mud from the pup's side. The fur beneath was sticky and warm. The dog's chest fluttered a tiny, uneven pulse of defiance. It lifted its head weakly, eyes half-lidded, glassy but alive. Brown eyes, deep, pleading eyes, the kind that made you forget the rest of the world. And for the briefest second, Ethan wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in Kandahar, kneeling beside a dying K9 under the wreckage of a collapsed compound. Shadow's chest had been still, his paw limp in Ethan's hand, the smell of dust and diesel, the silence after chaos. "Not again," Ethan whispered, his throat tightening. "Not this time." The wind howled through the trees as if to answer. He shrugged off his field jacket, the same one Shadow used to curl against on long missions, and wrapped it gently around the pup. It whimpered once, then pressed its head against the fabric nose, twitching faintly, as if recognizing safety. The veteran lifted it carefully, cradling it close to his chest. The tiny heartbeat thudded against his ribs, fragile but stubborn. "You're tough," he muttered. "You're gonna make it." His breath clouded around them, mist mingling with falling snow. Back in the truck, Ethan laid the bundled pup on the passenger seat, angling the vent toward it. The heater coughed warm air, melting the ice from its fur. He started the engine and gripped the steering wheel, staring at the endless white ahead. There was no vet nearby, not at this hour, but the Bitter Creek training base still had a medic tent from the winter drills. It was 20 miles through mountain roads, but that was where he was heading now. "Hang in there, kid," he said, glancing sideways. The puppy's eyes fluttered open, barely conscious. Its tiny paw twitched against the jacket, a reflex or maybe a reach. Ethan's chest ached. He hadn't realized how long it had been since something small had trusted him. Snow whipped harder as he drove the wipers, beating in rhythm with his heart. The road narrowed, slick, and shadowed by pines that loomed like ghosts. The pup let out a soft sound, half whine, half sigh, and Ethan reached over, resting a steady hand over the bundle. He parked near the medic tent engine, idling, and turned to the passenger seat. The bundle of jacket and fur was still. For a second, fear gripped his chest tighter than the cold. Then the pup stirred a weak breath, fogging the air. Relief struck him like warmth. Still fighting, he whispered. He carried the tiny body through the storm boots, sinking into snow, the lanterns outside the tent swinging violently. Inside the space was dim lit by a single hanging bulb that hummed like a tired memory. The metal table in the center was cold, but it would have to do. He laid the pup down gently, unwrapping the jacket. Blood soaked through patches of the fabric. His hands trembled as he reached for the field kit. Years ago, he had patched up men in worse shape with less light. But patching up this creature was different. There was no training manual for mercy. The pup's breathing came in stuttered bursts. Ethan wiped the mud from its fur, checking for wounds. One leg was swollen and bent out of alignment, the side bruised deep purple under its coat. It tried to lift its head, but pain stopped it. "Don't," Ethan said softly. "Save your strength." He tore a strip from his undershirt and used it to clean the cuts, his movements steady but his heart racing. When the blood refused to stop, he pressed down gently with gauze from the kit. The pup's cry was small and broken, the kind that clawed straight through bone. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice calm. "I know, kid. I know." The medic, an old friend from training named Willis, arrived a few minutes later, called in by the noise. His gray hair stuck to his forehead, eyes widening as he saw the scene. "What the hell, Ward?" "That's an animal." "It's a life," Ethan replied without looking up. Willis sighed, rubbing his temples. "You can't save them all. Not out here. Look at him, he's gone before sunrise." Ethan's tone dropped to steel. "Then he won't go alone." Willis studied him for a long moment, then muttered fine, and went for the supply chest. Together they worked in silence, one mixing saline from the med pack, the other holding the pup still. When they finished, Willis set down the syringe and leaned back. "There. That's all I can do. The rest's up to him." He turned to leave, but stopped at the flap. "You staying?" Ethan nodded once. "Then God help you." The flap closed, leaving Ethan alone, with the sound of the wind scraping the canvas. He sat on the stool, elbows on his knees, watching the tiny creature breathe under the dim light. Each rise and fall of its chest seemed like a defiance against the world. "You're tougher than you look," he murmured. The pup whimpered softly, its ear twitching. Ethan reached out, hesitating before letting his fingers brush its fur. It was still damp, still cold, but alive. He found himself talking again, not to fill the silence, but because something inside him needed to. "My unit used to have a dog, Shadow. Smartest damn soldier I ever met. Saved lives. Saved mine." He paused, his throat tightening. "Didn't make it home. None of us really did." The pup stirred, nose twitching, and then weakly it pressed its face against Ethan's hand. The motion was instinctive, fragile, but it broke something open in him. "You're safe now," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. "And maybe... so am I." Hours passed. The storm howled outside, wrapping the tent in sound. Ethan stayed awake, checking the pup's breathing every few minutes. He wrapped another blanket around it, feeding warmth through his palms. At one point the lantern flickered out. Darkness swallowed them, but he didn't move to relight it. Instead, he sat there feeling the rhythm of its faint heartbeat against his wrist. It was small but steady. That was enough. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion hit him like a wave. His head sank against the side of the cot, his body still half curled around the pup's resting place. In his dream, or maybe it wasn't one, he heard Shadow's bark echo through the tent, deep and strong. Then a softer sound followed a small whine, alive and real. He opened his eyes. The lantern had flickered back to life, casting gold across the pup's fur. Its breathing had changed smoother, now no longer ragged. Its head turned slightly toward him, and for the first time since finding it, the eyes opened fully. They were tired eyes, but aware. Watching him. Ethan smiled faintly. "Welcome back, soldier," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of relief. The pup blinked slowly as if understanding. "Yeah," he added softly. "You made it." The storm outside began to die, leaving behind the soft hiss of snow falling from the roof. Ethan leaned back in the chair, his body aching but lighter than it had felt in years. For the first time since the war, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. The pup shifted in its sleep, pressing closer to the warmth of his arm. Ethan stayed like that until the first light of dawn crept through the canvas, pale and blue. When he finally stood his back stiff from the chair, he realized something that made him smile despite the fatigue. He wasn't leaving Bitter Creek tonight. Not yet. He had a promise to keep. He walked to the small table, refilled the water bowl, and checked the pup's leg one last time. Then he looked out through the tent flap at the snow-covered mountains glimmering in sunrise. "Looks like it's just you and me now," he said quietly. Ethan stood just outside the medic tent, his breath curling into the cold. He hadn't slept. The little German shepherd pup, now called Chance, lay on the table inside, still wrapped in Ethan's old combat jacket, his small chest rising and falling with fragile persistence. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot from the night's vigil, but the exhaustion didn't matter. Every few minutes he went back inside, touched the pup's paw, and counted each shallow breath. Somewhere deep down, the soldier in him knew what it meant to stay on watch, even if this battle had no orders and no rank. When the rumble of an engine echoed down the road, he turned sharply. A dark green truck crawled through the snow tires, spinning before it stopped near the tent. A tall woman stepped out, her red parka stark against the white world. She moved quickly, her boots crunching through the crusted frost, a metal case swinging at her side. "Morning, Sergeant," she called, her voice firm but gentle. "Heard you've got a patient." Ethan blinked, surprised anyone had come. "You're the vet?" he asked, straightening instinctively. She nodded. "Dr. Clara Hayes. Your commander radioed last night before the lines went out. He said you'd need help." She brushed a strand of wind-blown hair from her face and added, "I didn't expect my first call of the day to be a Marine playing field medic for a puppy." "Guess I didn't either," Ethan replied, stepping aside to hold the flap open. The warmth inside hit them both, mixed with antiseptic and the faint scent of coffee. Clara's eyes softened when she saw the small shape on the table. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, setting her kit down. The pup looked smaller under the light, the jacket still wrapped loosely around his body, the fur still wet in places where the bandages hadn't fully covered. She unwrapped the fabric carefully, revealing the damage beneath. "He's been hit hard," she said, examining the leg. "Not just last night. Maybe a day or two before. Internal bruising, some tearing on the flank. You did a good job stabilizing it, though." Ethan crossed his arms, watching every motion she made. Didn't want him to die out there. Clara glanced up at him. "You did more than most would have done." Her tone carried no judgment, only quiet respect. She worked methodically, cleaning wounds, checking the splint, whispering soft reassurances the way people talk to both children and dying things. "You've done this before?" she said after a while. Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, my unit worked with K9S overseas. I patched them up when I could." "And when you couldn't?" she asked softly. His silence was answer enough. The wind pushed faintly against the tent walls, making them tremble. Clara adjusted the pup's leg, then wrapped it carefully with a clean gauze strip. Chance whimpered, but didn't fight. "He trusts you," she said without looking up. Ethan frowned slightly. "How can you tell? Because he's letting me hurt him while you're here," she said simply. The words hit him harder than he expected. He'd spent years avoiding the feeling of being trusted, afraid of what he might fail to protect again. And yet here it was a wounded creature that had decided he was safe. Clara finished the bandage and reached for a syringe. "We'll give him fluids, antibiotics, and warmth. The rest depends on his will." She glanced at him, studying the hard lines of his face, the creases carved deep around his eyes. "And maybe on yours, too." Ethan didn't answer. He pulled a folding chair closer to the table and sat down beside the pup. Clara handed him a small syringe filled with clear liquid. "Hold him steady." Their fingers brushed for an instant, and Ethan flinched slightly at the human contact. He steadied the pup's neck while she injected the fluid into the vein. Chance whimpered once, then sighed, his tiny body relaxing under the warmth of the IV. Clara wiped her hands on a cloth and stepped back. "That's all for now. We wait." Ethan exhaled, the air trembling out of him. "You think he'll make it?" "I think he's stubborn," she replied, glancing toward the dog. "And I think stubbornness tends to survive." A quiet smile flickered across her face before fading into professionalism again. She packed up her tools, moving with precise care. The silence between them grew comfortable, filled with the steady hum of the generator outside. "You should rest," she said finally. "You look like you've been up all night." "I have," Ethan said simply. "I promised him a sunrise." Clara looked at him, something like understanding softening her expression. "You know you don't have to save every broken thing that crosses your path." "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but this one found me first." She didn't argue. Instead, she took a small blanket from her bag and spread it over the pup, tucking the edges under the jacket. "Keep him warm," she said. "He'll need body heat to hold steady through the next few hours." Ethan nodded, pulling his chair closer to the table. As Clara stepped toward the flap, she paused. "You're good with him?" she said. "You've got a calm he listens to. Calm's just what's left after the noise." He replied. She watched him for a heartbeat longer, then smiled faintly and left her boots fading into the crunch of snow outside. Inside the tent, Ethan sat in silence, his hand resting lightly on the pup's back. Chance's breathing had steadied no longer the frantic rise and fall of panic. Instead, it was slow, measured, alive. The jacket around him still carried the faint smell of dust oil and distant memories, but now it also carried warmth. Ethan spoke softly, not expecting an answer. "You did good today, kid." Inside the medic tent, the air had turned thin and still heavy with the faint scent of antiseptic and coffee that had long gone cold. Ethan Ward sat beside the metal table, elbows resting on his knees, watching Chance breathe. The pup's chest rose and fell beneath a layer of worn blanket, each shallow breath catching faintly at the end before resuming again. The IV bag swayed slightly in the draft. Dr. Clara Hayes had left earlier, promising to check again in the morning, but her absence made the tent feel emptier than he expected. He wasn't used to company anymore, let alone company that noticed the ghosts behind his eyes. For hours, Ethan hadn't moved, afraid that if he looked away too long, the fragile heartbeat might stop. He could see the small tremor that ran through Chance's hind leg every few minutes, the body remembering pain even as it healed. He whispered softly, "You're doing good, soldier. Hang in there." The dog's ear twitched at his voice, a quiet acknowledgement. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the canvas walls. The light bulb flickered, dimmed, then came back to life with a tired hum. The generator's steady drone faltered once-twice before sputtering into silence. The light vanished. Ethan stood instantly, instinct from too many deployments kicking in. He checked the corner switch, tapped the bulb, but nothing. Only the sound of the storm returning, whistling through the tent seams. "Great timing," he muttered, glancing at the pup. The air was already cooling the warmth, bleeding away fast. He couldn't risk the temperature dropping, The dog's body wouldn't handle it. Without hesitation, he grabbed the jacket and scooped the pup gently into his arms. Chance whimpered weakly, but didn't resist. "Easy," Ethan murmured. "We're moving somewhere warmer." Outside, the world was half swallowed by fog. The snow had hardened to a crust that cracked beneath his boots as he crossed the yard. His breath came out in white bursts, mingling with the faint glow from the hut lights across the base. Each step echoed like a pulse in the frozen air. When he reached his small barracks, he shouldered the door open, letting the stale warmth of his last fire spill into the night. The room was plain: a cot, a metal stove, a few shelves lined with old coffee tins and folded maps. On the far wall hung his father's words etched into a wooden plaque. "Real strength is not what you carry, but what you protect." He didn't remember hanging it there, only that it had followed him through every posting, like a quiet reminder of who he was supposed to be. Ethan laid the pup near the stove, stoking the embers until flames crawled back to life. The shadows retreated slightly, revealing how gaunt the animal still looked under its fur. He rubbed his hands together for warmth, and then pressed one against Chance's side. The small heartbeat pulsed faintly under his palm. Still there, still fighting, still. He whispered, "Good boy," and unwrapped his own blanket, tucking it over the dog before sliding down beside him. The fire popped sparks, snapping in the stillness. For a long time, neither of them moved. Ethan sat with his back against the cot, eyes fixed on the flickering orange light that reflected off the pup's fur. He felt the exhaustion of years settle into his bones, but it was a different kind of tired, softer, almost human. The sound of Chance's slow breathing filled the room like a lullaby he didn't know he needed. At some point, Ethan began talking again. Not loud, not forced, but as if he were talking to Shadow, his old partner. He told the story of the last mission, the explosion, the silence after. He spoke about coming home to find that the house didn't feel like home anymore, that the noise of the world had turned too loud for a man who'd lived too long in danger. He told the truth he'd never said out loud, that he wasn't afraid of dying overseas, but of surviving without purpose. Chance stirred halfway through his quiet confession, shifting closer to the warmth. Ethan's hand fell naturally to the dog's neck, fingers brushing the rough patch of fur where a scar had begun to form. "You're tougher than I was at your age," he said softly. "Guess we both got hit by something and just kept breathing." The stove flickered again, throwing a halo of light across the small room. Ethan's reflection shimmered faintly in the metal surface. His face-lined eyes heavy, but there was something new in them. Something that hadn't been there in years, gentleness. He dozed off without realizing it, the kind of half-sleep soldiers know well, where every sound keeps you hovering just above rest. When he woke, it was still dark. For a moment, confusion gripped him. The war dream, the sound of shouting. But then something small and warm moved under his chin. He looked down. Chance had crawled closer during the night, the blanket tangled around them both. The pup's head rested beneath his jaw, breathing steady, the faint rise and fall syncing with Ethan's own heartbeat. He froze, not wanting to break the moment. He couldn't remember the last time another living thing had trusted him enough to sleep against him. The fire had died to embers, but the warmth between them was enough. He let his eyes close again, the corners of his mouth twitching upward in the faintest of smiles. Outside, the wind had calmed, replaced by the soft drip of melting icicles. Dawn bled slowly into the room, the light turning the snow outside a muted gold. When Ethan finally sat up, the pup stirred, stretching slightly, but not moving away. He ran a hand over its head, feeling the small vibrations of life humming under the skin. "You made it through another night," he said quietly. "That makes two of us." The words felt truer than he meant them to. He stood and stoked the stove, poured what was left of the coffee into a tin cup, and looked down at the dog, now blinking in the new light. The base was silent, the world still asleep. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like isolation, it felt like grace. Ethan crouched, scratched behind the pup's ear, and said softly, "Guess I'm keeping you." The dog blinked slowly, as if the decision had already been made. Ethan woke before dawn, as he always did, his body trained by years of military habit. The first thing he saw wasn't the stove or the cot, but the small bundle of fur curled beside him on the blanket. Chance slept deeply, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the quiet hum of the base generator that had sputtered back to life overnight. Ethan rubbed his eyes and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He couldn't remember the last time he'd woken up next to peace. He poured water from a canteen into a tin bowl, watching the ripples settle before setting it near the pup. "All right, soldier," he murmured. "Let's see how that leg's doing." Chance stirred, blinking groggily, his ears twitching at the sound of Ethan's voice. The bandaged leg shifted awkwardly as he tried to sit up. His body trembled under the effort, the soft whine escaping him, sounding almost embarrassed. Ethan crouched beside him, steadying his side. "Easy," he said softly. "No medals today. Just try." The pup tilted his head, as if recognizing the tone of a leader he wanted to obey. Then slowly he tried again. His paws slipped on the wooden floor at first, claws scraping for traction, but his determination was fierce. For one small second, he stood. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't even stable, but it was upright. Then his back leg folded and he went down hard, a sharp cry cutting through the air. Ethan winced at the sound, his heart jumping. He reached forward instinctively, ready to hold the pup down to stop him from trying again. But before he could, Chance pushed himself up once more, trembling like a leaf in the wind. Every muscle in his small body seemed to protest, but he refused to stay down. And then he did it, stood again, balancing shakily on 3 legs, panting with effort but victorious. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, the same feeling he used to get watching his men survive impossible drills. He knelt, resting a hand gently on the pup's shoulder. "There you go," he whispered, his throat thick. "That's how you fight." Chance's tail moved faintly just once, as if in agreement. The tiny gesture was enough to crack the quiet open. Ethan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. "You're not giving up, are you?" The pup looked at him, panting eyes bright, despite exhaustion. "Good," Ethan added. "Neither am I." The rest of the day unfolded with a strange kind of stillness that wasn't empty, but whole. The sun melted the last of the snow around the hut, and the scent of wet pine drifted through the open window. Ethan cleaned the space, stoked the stove, and prepared a bit of food from the base rations, cutting it into small pieces for Chance. The dog watched each movement with alert curiosity, his head tilting from side to side. When Ethan placed the bowl down, Chance sniffed, hesitated, then began to eat. It was clumsy and slow, but every bite felt like a victory to witness. Watching him, Ethan found himself smiling again, a real one this time. He took out an old notebook from the shelf, a field log he hadn't touched in years. The pages were still smudged with dirt from deployment. He flipped past the pages filled with coordinates, weapon lists, and half-written reports until he found a blank one. He wrote, "Day 1. Chance stood, walked 3 steps, ate without help. It wasn't military protocol anymore, it was something closer to faith. That afternoon, Dr. Clara Hayes returned in her red parka, brushing snow from her sleeves as she entered. She smiled when she saw Chance standing near the cot. "Well, look at that," she said softly. "Didn't think I'd see him on his feet this soon." "Neither did I," Ethan admitted. "But he's stubborn." "Then he fits right in," she replied. She checked the bandage, adjusted it slightly, then gave the dog a gentle pat. "He's healing fast. The leg's not perfect yet, but the bone's setting clean." "That's good news," Ethan said, and for once the words didn't sound mechanical. Clara noticed the shift in his voice, the small ease that hadn't been there before. "You've been good for him," she said. "Maybe he's been good for you too." He looked down at the dog, who now lay sprawled in front of the stove, asleep with one paw twitching in a dream. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "Maybe he has." When Clara left, the hut felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. As evening settled in, Ethan sat at the small wooden desk sorting through a pile of unopened mail he'd avoided since returning from duty. Most were government forms, pension updates, and one yellowed envelope that carried his mother's familiar cursive. He hadn't had the strength to read her letters for months. Too much guilt, too much silence between them. But tonight felt different. He tore it open carefully, the scent of paper and faint perfume drifting out. The letter was short, written in his mother's steady hand. "Ethan, you've carried the weight of loss too long, son. Maybe it's time to carry something living again. Love, Mom." He sat there for a long time, the words blurring as his eyes stung. Outside, the wind had died, completely replaced by the faraway cry of a hawk. Chance stirred in his sleep, stretching slightly, one paw resting on the edge of Ethan's boot, as though anchoring himself to safety. The veteran folded the letter, slipped it into the jacket pocket hanging by the door, and looked down at the pup. "Already am," he whispered. The words slipped out without thought, but carried truth heavier than anything he'd said in years. He reached down, brushed his hand through the pup's fur, and felt the small heartbeat thumping steady beneath his palm. That sound filled the silence better than any prayer. As night deepened, the fire burned low, and Ethan leaned back against the wall, watching the flames. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to keep guard. The day began bright, deceivingly calm, the kind of morning that promised safety before it broke its word. The sky over Bitter Creek was a soft blue veil stretched over the white peaks, and the air smelled faintly of pine and thaw. By noon, the temperature had shifted, the stillness had turned heavy, and the clouds that gathered over the ridge looked like an army in formation. Ethan Ward could feel it in his bones before he saw it, the weight of weather that wasn't just cold, but merciless. He stood outside his hut, coffee steaming in one hand, watching the wind pick up stray flakes from the ground and twist them into small ghosts. Chance sat beside him, fur sleek and growing thicker, now his once scrawny frame stronger with each day. The pup's leg had healed enough for him to run again, though a faint limp still marked every few steps. He didn't seem to mind. He had learned to live with scars much like the man beside him. "Storm's turning fast," Ethan muttered. He glanced toward the radio tower by the command tent. It was already humming, low static flickering in the air. Lieutenant Cole stepped out of the base office, his coat buttoned, high eyes scanning the ridge. "Forecast says we've got 6 hours before visibility drops," he called out. "Lock down non-essentials, pull the patrols." Ethan nodded. "Copy that, sir." He turned to find Chance still watching the horizon, ears pricked forward, body tense. "You feel it too, don't you?" The dog whined softly. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I don't like it either." By late afternoon, the wind began to roar. Snow came sideways, a white wall that swallowed the yard. Power lines snapped in bursts of sparks, and one by one the base lights flickered out. Ethan and Corporal Tyler Moss worked quickly to secure the huts, tying ropes between doorways so no one would lose their path in the storm. The radio was their only link, but even that crackled with static so thick it was nearly useless. Cole's voice came through, faintly strained but firm. "Stay put until further notice. No one leaves the perimeter." "Copy that," Ethan replied. He hung up the receiver, glancing toward the window, where Chance stood rigid, staring into the swirling white. His ears flattened, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, crossing the room. The dog barked once, sharp and urgent, then ran to the door, pawing at the wood. "No, not tonight," Ethan said. "We're staying in." But Chance barked again, louder this time, tail, stiff body vibrating with something more than fear. Instinct. The same instinct that had saved him once before. The radio crackled again, this time with a burst of static, followed by a voice faint but clear enough to freeze the air. "Supply truck. Road ridge overturned, need help, then nothing." Ethan's breath caught. He turned back toward the door. Cole's team, Tyler asked from the bunk. "Supply run from the southern post," Ethan said. "They must have been caught in it." Tyler swore under his breath. "They'll never make it back in this." Chance barked again, scratching at the floor, whining toward the wind that screamed outside. Ethan looked down at him, torn between orders, and the ache in his gut that told him some things couldn't wait for permission. He grabbed his coat. "Get the medic gear ready," he told Tyler. "If I'm not back in 30, tell Cole to follow the tracks." "You're going out there," Tyler demanded. He senses something Ethan said, clipping the leash to Chance's harness. "And I've learned to trust his gut more than mine." Tyler shook his head but didn't argue. "Then take this," he said, tossing him a flashlight and a flare gun. "And Riker's luck, 'cause you'll need it." Ethan nodded once and stepped into the storm. The world beyond the door was chaos. Snow tore sideways, blinding and alive, every gust a slap of ice. He could barely see 10 feet ahead, but Chance led the way nose down, moving with certainty that defied reason. The leash pulled tight as the dog veered left toward the ridge road. Ethan followed Boots, sinking deep into the drifts, lungs burning with each breath. The sound of the wind drowned everything until he heard it. A faint metallic creak, the groan of metal under weight. He squinted through the blur and saw it a shape half buried in snow headlights, flickering weakly under a mound of white. The supply truck lay tilted on its side, its front wheel spinning uselessly in the air. "Got you," Ethan muttered, trudging forward. Chance barked, furiously circling the wreck. The driver's door was jammed, snow packed tight against it. Ethan pulled his gloves off and dug through the drift with bare hands, ignoring the sting of cold. When he finally cleared enough space to reach the handle, he yanked hard. It opened with a groan. Inside, a young soldier slumped over the steering wheel, blood trailing down from a cut on his forehead. Private Ruiz Ethan said, recognizing the name from Cole's roster. "Hang on, kid." The boy's lips were pale, his breath shallow. Ethan pressed 2 fingers to his neck, weak pulse but alive. He glanced back toward the base. The lights were invisible through the storm. "We're not waiting," he said. He unbuckled the soldier and pulled him free. The body was heavy, the snow relentless, but Chance stayed close, barking encouragement, guiding them with quick darts forward and back. Halfway through the trudge home, Ethan slipped his knee, hitting ice. The soldier's weight nearly took him down, but before he could fall, Chance wedged himself against his side, bracing him, growling low. "You stubborn miracle," Ethan muttered, regaining balance. The dog barked once, tail thrashing in the snow. Step by step, they pushed forward. The world shrank to the rhythm of breath and will, Ethan's labored grunts, Chance's fierce determination, the faint heartbeat under his glove from the soldier he carried. By the time they reached the base perimeter, Ethan was half frozen, gasping. Figures emerged through the white, Cole, Tyler, and 2 medics' faces masked in frost. "We've got him," Ethan shouted, voice breaking. The medics rushed in, taking Ruiz from his arms. Cole grabbed Ethan's shoulder. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said over the wind. Ethan met his eyes. "Then put it on my record after he lives." Cole's jaw tightened, but his eyes flicked toward Chance, who now sat by the medic tent, forsoaked, shivering, but refusing to leave the boy's side. The lieutenant's expression softened. "He led you there. Didn't give me a choice," Ethan replied. Cole nodded once. The world smelled of mud diesel and the strange sweetness of things coming alive again. For most of the men, the change was a relief, a signal that the worst was behind them. But for Ethan Ward, it felt like the calm before another kind of storm, the kind you couldn't fight with strength or grit. He stood near the motor pool, his sleeves rolled, watching Chance chase a rag across the yard. The pup had grown fast in the weeks since the blizzard, taller, now his coat sleek and full. There was still a limp in his back leg, but it had turned into more of a swagger than a flaw. He darted through puddles, tail wagging, mouth full of the cloth he treated like treasure. Nearby, Corporal Tyler Moss leaned against a truck, arms crossed, grinning. "You two look like you've been training for the cover of a recruitment poster," he called. "One grizzled war vet, one miracle mutt, both too stubborn to die." Ethan smirked faintly, but didn't reply. He didn't want to break the spell of the morning, didn't want to say aloud what the air already whispered: change was coming. He felt it before he heard it. The hum of an approaching engine, the low vibration in the ground. When he turned, a white government van was climbing the ridge road tires, spitting mud. The stenciled lettering on the side, Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Unit, hit him like a punch. "No," he muttered, "not yet." Lieutenant Aaron Cole appeared from the command tent, a clipboard in hand, his expression the same careful calm he used when delivering bad news. He stopped a few feet away, voice steady. "Orders came through from Helena this morning. We're being reassigned. The new recon team's taking over this sector. Ethan nodded slowly, his throat tight. And the dog. Cole hesitated just long enough for the silence to say everything. Transfer request was approved. They want him evaluated for civilian placement. The words were clean, professional, and heartless. Ethan stared past him toward Chance, who was still trotting proudly across the yard. Placement, he repeated quietly. Like he's a piece of equipment? I don't like it either, Cole said. But protocol's protocol. He's unregistered, untrained, technically still government property. You know how it works. Ethan's jaw tightened. No, sir. I know how to fight for what matters. He turned on his heel and walked toward his hut. Inside, he sat at the desk, pulled a sheet of official letterhead from a drawer, and began to write in the same precise handwriting he'd used for years of field reports. To whom it may concern, this is a formal request to retain the German Shepherd Identification Scout, no Chance currently under my care. He has demonstrated intelligence discipline and loyalty under extreme conditions, contributing directly to mission success and personnel safety. I will assume full financial and custodial responsibility for his care training and certification. He signed his name, folded the page, and sealed it in an envelope marked Command Office. Then he stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. When he stepped back outside, Tyler was waiting by the door, his usual grin dimmed. You're really going to try it? Not trying, Ethan said. Doing. Tyler nodded and handed him a scarf. Gray wool with frayed ends. Put this on him before they come. Every good soldier needs colors. You know he's not military, Ethan said softly. Could have fooled me, Tyler replied. He saved a man's life. That's more than most medals mean. An hour later, the reply came back, short, printed, and final. Request denied due to policy restrictions. No explanation, no signature. Just the stamp of bureaucracy that had forgotten how to bleed. Ethan crushed the paper in his fist. When he looked up, the van had already pulled into the yard. A woman stepped out, middle-aged, calm, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore gloves and carried a clipboard. Sergeant Ward, she called. I'm Dr. Lena Foster, here for the Shepherd transfer. Ethan's pulse quickened, though his face remained still. He's not ready. None of them ever are. She said, her tone gentle but unmoved. Cole appeared behind her, hands tucked into his coat pockets. It's out of our hands, he said quietly. Ethan's chest tightened. He turned toward Chance, who had stopped playing, his head tilted, sensing tension in the air. Come here, boy, Ethan said, voice low. The dog trotted over, tail wagging uncertainly. Sit. Chance obeyed immediately, looking up with bright, trusting eyes. Ethan knelt, resting a hand on his neck. The fur was warm, soft beneath his calloused palm. They want to take you somewhere new, he said, keeping his tone calm, though the words scraped like gravel. You'll be safe there. You'll be fine. Chance tilted his head, confused by the tremor in his voice. Dr. Foster approached with the leash, but Ethan stopped her with a look. Let me, he said. He unclipped the old rope collar and replaced it with the gray scarf, tying it loosely around the pup's neck. Every Marine needs something to carry into battle, he murmured. This one's yours. Cole stood a few feet away, silent, the wind whipping at his coat. For what it's worth, he said, I put in a recommendation with the K-9 training division. If they approve it, he might come back to us someday. Paperwork takes time. Ethan met his eyes. You did that? Cole nodded once. Keep faith, Sergeant. The words didn't help. Nothing could have. The woman opened the van door, motioning gently. Come on, sweetheart, she said to Chance. The dog didn't move. He just looked at Ethan. Ears flattened, eyes wide. Go on, Ethan whispered. You did your duty, soldier. Now go make me proud. Chance whined softly, pressing his forehead into Ethan's palm. The touch was brief, but deep enough to make something break inside him. Then slowly, obediently, the dog climbed into the van. He turned once at the door, tail low, but steady, watching as the man who'd saved him took a step back and stood at attention. The door closed. The engine started. As the van drove off, its tires splattering mud, Ethan remained standing, hand raised in a silent salute until it disappeared behind the ridge. Tyler came up beside him, voice quiet. "You did right, Sarge." Ethan didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the empty road, the scarf's twin still hanging loosely from his wrist. Cole's voice came from behind them, soft and steady. "Sometimes doing right feels like hell." When night fell, Ethan sat outside his hut, the cold creeping in through his sleeves, the scarf folded neatly in his lap. The stars were sharp above Bitter Creek, brighter than he'd seen in years. The base had grown quieter since the relocation orders were issued. Half the men had already left their tents folded and trucks packed. What remained was a skeleton unit maintaining drills and inventory until final withdrawal. The yard that once echoed with shouts, drills, and laughter now held only the hollow ring of boots against mud and the hum of machinery. Ethan Ward moved through it all like a ghost in uniform. He did his duties with precision-checked inventory lists, supervised maintenance, and trained the new recruits, but each task felt mechanical, stripped of the warmth that once filled the days when a small German Shepherd pup had limped beside him. His hut felt larger, now colder. The cot was neatly made each morning, the stove still warm at night, yet something vital had gone missing from the air, as if the silence itself were grieving. Some nights Ethan caught himself glancing toward the corner near the heater, half expecting to see a small shape curled in sleep. The absence hit him harder than he'd ever admit. The rest of the men noticed the change too. Tyler Moss, usually loud and irreverent, had grown quiet. One morning as they ran drills, he jogged beside Ethan and said, "Feels strange without him, doesn't it?" Ethan didn't answer. Tyler kept talking, voice soft. "You know I caught myself saving my dinner scraps last night. Didn't even realize it till I looked down and remembered there's no one here to eat them." Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose, the closest thing to a laugh he could manage. "You're not the only one," he said, but his tone was heavy. They finished the run in silence. Later that afternoon, Ethan stood on the ridge watching clouds gather over the mountains again. The wind had a bite to it, carrying the scent of distant rain. He thought about the night of the blizzard, about Chance's bark slicing through the chaos, about how instinct and trust had led them to save Ruiz's life. He thought about the van that had taken the pup away, about the sound of tires fading into the cold, and the way the world had gone quiet after. It wasn't the first time Ethan had lost a partner, but this loss was different, not violent or abrupt, but slow and heavy, the kind that settled inside and stayed. That evening, when he returned to his hut, a message envelope lay on his desk. It was marked Official Correspondence, Helena Regional Command. Ethan tore it open without ceremony. Inside was a printed letter from the Marine K-9 Division Sergeant Ward. "We are writing to confirm that the German Shepherd known as Chance has been accepted into the United States Marine K-9 Division for evaluation and training. His initial reports indicate exceptional responsiveness and emotional intelligence. Pending certification, he will be assigned to an active handler upon completion." The words blurred slightly as Ethan reread them. The first instinct was relief. Chance was alive, safe, thriving. But right behind it came something else, an ache, deep and fierce. He had wanted the dog to live free, to find purpose. He just hadn't expected how much it would hurt, knowing that purpose didn't include him. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the jacket pocket where his mother's old note still rested. For a moment he sat at the desk, staring at nothing, listening to the hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the clock. Then he reached into the drawer and took out the gray scarf Tyler had tied around Chance's neck the day of the transfer. It still held the faint scent of fur and cold air. He ran it through his fingers, feeling the coarse threads catch against his skin. Without thinking, he stood and crossed to the wall where his father's plaque hung. He hesitated, then draped the scarf over the edge of it, the words, "Real strength is not what you carry, but what you protect," partly hidden beneath the fabric. "You'd have liked him, Dad," Ethan said quietly. He didn't talk much either. The sound of his own voice startled him. He hadn't spoken out loud in days. He sat on the cot, elbows on his knees, and let the silence settle again. The night outside deepened, the last glow of sunset fading behind the ridge. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its cry, carried by the wind. Ethan leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. His thoughts drifted between memory and hope to the image of Chance standing tall in some training yard far from here, wearing a proper harness instead of a makeshift rope, eyes sharp tail high. He pictured him obeying commands, running drills, doing what he was born to do, not just survive, but serve. The thought steadied him. Maybe that was enough. Maybe saving him had never been about keeping him. He remembered something his father used to say when Ethan was a boy, rescuing stray dogs from the edge of town. If they trust you enough to leave, you did your job right. For the first time since the van disappeared, Ethan understood. The next morning, the base was busier than usual. Cole had called for a final equipment check before departure. The men moved with quiet efficiency, their faces drawn with fatigue and something close to melancholy. When Cole passed by Ethan's station, he paused. "You got my message?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "I did. He's doing well." Cole set his tone softer than usual. "Word from Helena says he's one of the most promising recruits they've seen in years. They said he has a handler's temperament." "He always did," Ethan said, managing a small smile. "Just needed someone to believe it first." Cole's eyes flickered toward the scarf hanging over the plaque. "You ever think you were the handler he needed?" Maybe, Ethan said quietly. But maybe he needed the Corps more. Needed something bigger than just me. Cole nodded, respecting the truth of it. He'll come back around. Dogs like that always do. When the lieutenant walked off, Ethan returned to his work, sorting gear and packing crates, his movements steady. Later, when dusk came, he sat outside the hut again. The wind was calm, the sky streaked with purple. He held his coffee, letting it go cold, as he stared at the ridge line. He thought of Chance somewhere beyond those mountains. Maybe running across open ground, barking at the wind, training for missions he couldn't imagine. "You're built for more than I ever was," Ethan murmured. "And that's how it should be." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely, and for the first time in a long while he prayed. Not for himself, not for the men under his command, not even for safety. He prayed for one life, a dog who had shown him what mercy looked like, when everything else in the world had forgotten it. The wind that morning was dry and sharp, carrying the smell of dust instead of snow. The Bitter Creek base was long behind him now, its frozen silence replaced by the restless rhythm of a new posting near Helena. The facility was larger, busier, and brighter rows of barracks gleaming under the Montana sun drills, echoing through open fields. For months, Ethan had thrown himself into his duties with renewed purpose, training recruits, maintaining order, doing what Marines did best, move forward. But no matter how disciplined he became, there were moments when the past caught him off guard. The sound of claws on concrete, the shape of a shadow at his heel, the quiet weight that used to sleep by his bunk. Some absences never faded. They only became familiar ghosts. He woke before dawn, as usual, pulling on his uniform, buttoning his jacket with the practiced rhythm of muscle memory. Outside, the air was crisp, laced with the scent of sage and diesel. The recruits were already assembling on the field, their chatter dissolving as Ethan approached. "Eyes up," he barked, voice carrying across the gravel. They straightened instantly. "Today's about endurance and discipline," he continued. "The mission doesn't care if you're tired. The cold doesn't care if you're ready. You move anyway." His tone was firm, but the old hollowness was gone. Teaching had filled the space that loss had left behind. As the men began their run, Ethan walked the perimeter, clipboard in hand, when a convoy rolled through the main gate. He barely looked up at first. It was common for visiting units to arrive unannounced, but then a sharp bark pierced the air. Not an ordinary bark. Commanding, focused, clear. It froze him mid-step. For a moment the world blurred into sound and memory, the echo of boots on ice, the thud of a small heartbeat against his chest, the whisper of a name in the dark. He turned. Across the yard, 6 handlers in dark fatigues marched in formation, each one holding a leash. The dogs trotted beside them, lean-muscled, their eyes scanning everything. But one stood out, a tall German shepherd with a rich black and tan coat, the sun glinting off the metal tag on his harness. He moved with precision, head-high tail, steady every inch a soldier. The handler barked a command, and the formation halted. The dog obeyed instantly, but his ears twitched, nose lifting, turning toward the crowd as if searching. Ethan felt his pulse stutter. "No," he whispered under his breath. "It can't be." But it was. The tag on the harness caught the light again, and he saw it clearly, this time Chance. He didn't realize he'd stopped walking until the handler noticed his stare. The woman, young, sharp-featured, maybe late 20s, gave him a polite nod. "Sergeant," she called. "This area cleared for K-9 drills." Ethan couldn't speak at first. He cleared his throat. "Yeah," he said hoarsely. "You're good to go." The handler smiled and turned back to her unit, giving another command. But the dog wasn't listening. Chance's head whipped around, fully, eyes locking onto the man standing near the bleachers. It was a look Ethan knew too well, recognition so deep it defied reason. "Chance," he whispered, voice barely audible over the drills. The name traveled like a current through the air, and before anyone could react, the disciplined soldier of the K-9 unit broke rank. The leash jerked free from the handler's glove, and Chance bolted across the field paws, pounding against the gravel, a streak of motion and memory colliding. The recruits turned in surprise. The handler shouted, "Chance, heel," but it was too late. Ethan didn't move until the last second when the dog hit him like a small hurricane of muscle and joy. He dropped to his knees, his arms wrapping instinctively around the thick fur, feeling the weight, the warmth, the life. Chance's tail was thrashing his breath hot against Ethan's neck, his body trembling with excitement. Ethan laughed, a sound raw and broken, the kind that carries years of silence in it, and then before he knew it, tears mixed with the dust on his face. "You found me?" He whispered, his hands clutching the dog's shoulders. "You really found me." The handler ran up, breathless, half apologetic, half awed. "I'm so sorry, Sergeant. He's never done that before." Ethan wiped his face quickly and shook his head. "Don't be sorry, he just remembered." The woman blinked, then recognition dawned in her expression. "Wait, Ward, you're the sergeant from Bitter Creek." Ethan nodded. "That's right." She smiled, glancing down at Chance, who sat now panting happily beside him. "Then I guess this reunion was overdue. He's one of our best, you know. Passed every test they threw at him tracking obedience rescue. Even outperformed dogs twice his age. They said he came from a field rescue up north from a base that doesn't exist anymore." "It existed," Ethan said quietly. "For both of us." The woman's smile softened. "He's yours today, Sergeant. He's assigned to the joint training demonstration. Command figured it would make a good story, Marine and his rescued K-9 back together again." She handed him the leash, still warm from her grip. Ethan stared at it for a long moment before taking it. "Welcome back, soldier," he said, voice low. Chance barked once, sharp and clear, sitting perfectly at his side. The recruits who had gathered nearby watched in quiet awe. Even Lieutenant Cole, now stationed at Helena as division coordinator, stepped out from the training shed, coffee in hand, eyes crinkling at the edges. "Told you he'd come back around?" he said with a faint smile. Ethan looked up at him, emotion flickering behind the composure. "You knew paperwork takes time," Cole said. "I just made sure it went to the right place." The rest of the day blurred into motion. Ethan and Chance worked side by side during the drills, moving as if no time had passed at all. The commands came naturally, sit, stay, seek, and each one was met with precision. But between the formality of training, there were moments, glances, small gestures that spoke louder. When Ethan called his name, Chance's ears twitched the same way they had in that medic tent long ago. When he praised him, the tail wagged once, a measured salute. As the sun began to set, the field glowed gold. The recruits dispersed, the K-9 unit packed up, and still Ethan lingered on the grass with Chance beside him. Cole approached quietly. "He's official now," he said. "Full designation, K-9 MRC, Chance Marine Rescue and Companion Division. You'll be his assigned handler if you want him." Ethan looked at him, the setting sun catching the edge of his eyes. "You sure I'd call it destiny?" Cole replied. The officer turned away, leaving the two of them under the long stretch of fading light. Ethan crouched, resting a hand on Chance's back. The call came just before dawn on a Thursday. Ethan was in the training yard, his breath misting in the cold, when the alarm sounded across the base. A helicopter from the National Guard had gone down 50 miles north of Helena during a sudden squall. Visibility was near zero, temperatures dropping fast. Command wanted a Marine search unit with ground coordination, and Ethan volunteered before the sentence had even finished leaving Cole's mouth. "You sure about this?" Cole asked. "You've barely had leave in months." Ethan's answer was simple. "He's ready." Cole didn't need to ask who he was. By the time the convoy rolled out, the sun had barely touched the horizon. The air grew colder the higher they climbed, snow beginning to fall again, as if winter refused to leave. Ethan sat in the back of the lead transport, one gloved hand resting on Chance's harness. The dog sat alert, eyes bright, muscles coiled like wire. He had changed in the months since their reunion, stronger, leaner, the polished badge on his chest reading K9 MRC Chance. But beneath the uniform and discipline, Ethan still saw the pup he'd once carried through the snow, half dead and trembling. "We find them, we get out fast," Ethan said to the driver. "No heroics. This storm's coming in hard." The man nodded grimly. "Yes, sir." By mid-afternoon, the storm was no longer threatening, it was here. Sheets of rain mixed with sleet hammered the valley, turning the trail into a river of mud and rock. The wreckage had been located 2 miles west of their drop point, half buried in the slope. Ethan led the way on foot, his flashlight cutting through the gray mist. Chance moved ahead, nose low, following a scent only he could read. "Easy boy," Ethan called, his voice strained against the wind. "Steady." The path narrowed into a ledge that hugged the mountain's edge. The radio crackled with interference, then died completely. The storm swallowed every sound except their breathing and the crash of thunder. Then Chance stopped, frozen, mid-step, ears raised. A second later, Ethan heard it too, a faint cry through the storm, the sound of someone alive. "That's our man," he said. And they pushed forward. The ledge widened into a slope littered with debris, metal shards, broken branches, and a patch of fabric caught in the rocks. The helicopter's tail was visible, twisted and half buried. Chance barked once, then broke into a sprint toward a crevice near the wreck. "Chance, wait!" Ethan shouted, but it was too late. A low rumble answered instead, a warning growl from the mountain itself. Rocks shifted underfoot. The slope gave way. Ethan dove behind a ridge as the slide roared down earth and boulders tearing through the path like thunder. When the sound finally died, the air was thick with dust and silence. Chance Ethan's voice cracked. He scrambled to his feet, slipping through the debris, searching. His flashlight flickered against the wreckage until a bark, weak but clear, answered from below. He dropped to his knees, crawling through the narrow gap where the sound came from. Inside the flashlight beam found them a young pilot, face, bloodied but conscious, pinned under a metal frame, and beside him, Chance panting heavily, one paw scraped raw, his body pressed against the man's chest for warmth. "You stubborn, beautiful idiot," Ethan whispered, pushing through. He checked the pilot's pulse, weak but steady, then looked at the dog. "You found him." Chance gave a low whine tail, thumping once against the rock. Ethan grabbed the radio from his vest, yelling into it. "I've got one survivor, repeat, one alive. Need extraction now," Static answered, but he didn't stop shouting. He pulled the twisted metal aside, straining until his arms burned. The wreckage shifted, freeing the pilot. Ethan dragged him clear, then scooped Chance into his arms. The dog's body trembled violently, cold water dripping from his fur, but his eyes never left Ethan's. "Hang on," Ethan said, voice shaking. "You're coming with me." The climb back was brutal. Rain turned the ground to sludge and the wind cut like knives. Twice he slipped, catching himself against jagged rock, the weight of both bodies dragging him down. But he refused to stop. Every step was a battle, every breath a promise. Almost there, he murmured again and again the words more prayer than command. By the time he reached the ridge, the extraction crew was visible through the fog flashlights, flickering like distant stars. "Over here," someone shouted. Hands reached out, grabbing the pilot first, then steadying Ethan as he stumbled through the mud. He collapsed to his knees beside the stretcher, Chance still in his arms. "Get him warm," he ordered, voice hoarse. The medic knelt beside them, checking the dog's vitals. He's exhausted, hypothermic, but he's breathing. You did good, Sergeant. No. Ethan whispered, brushing a hand through the soaked fur. He did. The helicopter ride back was a blur of noise and light. Ethan sat hunched over one hand, resting on Chance's side, feeling the slow rise and fall under his palm. When they landed at the field hospital, medics rushed in to take both dog and pilot inside. Ethan followed, until Cole stopped him at the door. You need rest, Ward, he said. You're half frozen. Not until I see him. Cole's expression softened. 10 minutes. Ethan nodded. Inside the medical tent, Chance lay on a blanket near a heater, an IV taped to his foreleg, steam rising faintly from his damp coat. The pilot, bandaged but alive, lay sleeping a few feet away. Ethan sat beside the dog, his hands trembling with relief. He whispered, You saved him, kid. You saved us all again. Chance's tail moved weakly just once. His eyes fluttered open, dark and tired, then closed again as he sighed into sleep. Ethan stayed there all night, refusing the cot, refusing to leave. When dawn came, the world outside was quiet, washed in pale gold. Snow still clung to the peaks, but the storm had passed. Ethan poured himself a cup of black coffee, his hands still numb, and returned to the heater. Chance stirred as the first light touched his fur. Slowly he lifted his head, resting it on Ethan's knee, looking up with eyes that held every moment they'd shared the road and the storms, the loss, the return. Ethan smiled, his throat tightening. We made it again, he said softly. Guess that's what we do. The dog blinked slowly, content, his breathing deep and steady. Outside, the flag above the field hospital caught the wind and unfurled its fabric, rippling like a heartbeat against the sky. Ethan looked toward it, then back at his companion. You know, he said, his voice low and steady, they call us soldiers, but I think we're both just keepers of the living. You saved a man's life, and maybe a few pieces of mine, too. Chance let out a long breath, his head still resting against the warmth of Ethan's leg. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know what part of the plot touched you the most, and where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.